Hi, good morning, everyone. So great to be here on this beautiful sunny day in Brighton. My name's Jane Finnis. I'm the CEO at Culture24. I'm a white woman with curly hair. I'm in my 50s. I'm wearing a blue jacket. I'd like to welcome you all to a really exciting start of a series of seminars that Culture24 are running. We have been supported by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and they're part of that brilliant program of work that they've been doing over the last year or so called Digital Skills for Heritage. So this is the first of a series of 6 seminars, all designed around digital leadership, all on different themes. And today's theme is hybrid heritage. So we've got a fantastic set of speakers for you. So it would be great if you can introduce yourself in the chat. Just say who you are and where you're from. It's just nice to get a sense of who's out there and for you to get a sense of each other, because obviously this is a webinar. You can see me, you'll be able to see the speakers, but we can't see or hear you. And just to remind everybody that we are recording this session so that we can share it with people and yourselves later. So do, when you get the link, you can share it on with your colleagues. So as I said, this is the first of 6 sessions, and today we have 3 really fantastic speakers. The way we're going to structure the session is each speaker is going to speak for about 10 minutes. I'll be introducing the speakers as we go, and then once the 3 speakers have spoken, we'll come together and we'll have a chat and a Q&A with you guys out there. So as we're going along, you can put your questions into the Q&A function, as this is a webinar. There's a little box down below with this Q&A. And if you have any comments or observations, just put those into the chat. And I'm here with my colleagues, Anra and Alec, who are in the background. So they'll be kind of answering any questions that any of you have in the chat. So if you've got any problems or anything, just do stick something in the chat. And welcome to you all. Look, there's some great National Museums, Liverpool National Justice Museum. Brilliant. It's so nice to see everybody here. So where are we? 3 minutes past. I think that what we're going to do is we're going to get started. So as I said, today's theme is hybrid heritage. And our 3 speakers are going to be talking about the challenges and the opportunities that hybrid working have brought to all of us since the pandemic, the sort of unimaginable situation that we're all in now that a couple of years ago would have been a bit unthinkable. But our first speaker, who's going to kick us off with a kind of overview of what's been going on and the issues, is Zach Mensah. And Zach is one of the co-CEOs at Birmingham Museums Trust. We're also very lucky to have him on our board of trustees at Culture24. So Zach, are you out there? Oh, I've just been told.
Good morning.
Technical problem. Zach is out there, but he's logging back in. That looks like he's there. Brilliant. Hi, Zach. How are you doing?
Good morning. I just wanted to scare you by showing you how the fraught dangers of hybrid working. The machine decided to play up just then. But I'm here.
Yeah, we have literally. I'm sure everyone on this call has been there, but it's great to have you with us. If you have any problems, obviously this is the nature of the beast that we're dealing with now. So we're all behind you. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us, and over to you.
Great. Well, good morning, good evening, around the world. I'm Zach. I'm just going to take a little bit of time to talk through some of the implications, opportunities, and challenges that not just my organisation, but we in the sector have been thinking around in terms of all things hybrid. The first thing I wanted to say is that we can't go back. This idea of going back to normal is a myth of us all from pre-2020. The first time in 2021, in fact, a lot of people were talking about can't wait to get back, and actually I've long been concerned about how the old way, as we might call it now, wasn't necessarily the best for us as organizations or us as individuals. And I think we've got a real chance now to build a more inclusive organization. And I do fear this summer too many of us will just go back to business as usual. But I think that we as workers and as leaders of our organisations know now that our staff just know too much. There is another way of doing things, and I think now that door has been cracked open, it's something that we've all got to grapple with. And until recently, I've been talking about the future of work, when actually it's not really the future of work we're talking about in terms of remote or hybrid or combination. It's actually the present. What we're going through now is a huge disruption that it's been slowly happening. It's just took the pandemic for us to for some of it to catch up. So as an example, I was reflecting on my last trip before lockdown, which was end of January, early February 2020. I had my breakfast in Wales, I had my lunch in Paris, and then I had my dinner in Hamburg in Germany, because I was taking a train to Copenhagen. Because the reason I was taking the train is I was trying to be greener and not fly. So I thought I'd just work on the train. And that isn't something that years ago people would have necessarily thought was a super common thing. So even just before lockdown, it turns out that I've been working in a sort of hybrid way anyway. And my most recent trip, so following the pandemic a month ago, I went to my first trip to a conference was to Glasgow, where again, I managed to have breakfast, lunch and dinner in 3 different countries, which is a pretty cool benefit of the hybrid working environment. And so I think the pandemic has really forced experiments on us all. That's kind of smashed this idea of what work is, what the office is, what the culture should be like. And it's definitely compressed some of the technological parts of working. But for the last 20 plus years, there are people who have been doing full remote working. It's more common in organizations, you get a flexible work request and you treat your one day out of the office as if it was a special treat. Whereas I, for example, early in my career, I've been working 1 or 2 days at home since the beginning of my career. There's also cost of the office, or what is the office? For many of our workforce, your office could be literally a golf buggy, it could be out on the moors. There's lots of different ideas of what people think of their work, as well as being out on the road or on a gallery floor as an example. And so in that background, the internet is just one of the factors that have been disrupting that change, as well as, of course, societal factors. Work's been shifting year on year anyway. And so I think there are lots of assumptions about what work is in 2022. But other than your terms and conditions, there's been no real agreed contract about how we should be working. So very few organizations, for example, have a good training / policy on how to use digital tools. So when is it appropriate actually to use email? When should you have that face-to-face meeting? And so whilst Zoom solved the problem of getting into a call, the real question, this is a quote from Ben Evans, is, but why are you on that call? So technology has allowed us through the pandemic to carry on the old way, but all it's done for me is really highlight a number of the problems. And so in terms of some of the opportunities, I think it finally allows us all to address the limitations of the physical. So in my institution, for example, by moving to a weekly Teams call and recording it, it allows 100% of the staff to be able to find out what's happening in the organisation and submit questions both in advance or during the sessions itself. I've had lots of positive feedback from people that have worked for the organisation for years who've said that this is the first time they've been able to feel part of the organisation in that one particular aspect. My organisation has staff geographically dispersed across 9 locations. So it turns out that actually we've been a distributed model, but trying to operate as if everyone's in one office. And the modern office has only really been around in its current kind of form, as we all think about it, with T12 strip lighting, etc., for about the last 60 or 70 odd years. It's not actually that new, the office. It used to be that your office was your real proximity to your actual work location, whereas these days, so much of our work is collaboration with others, that it simply isn't the case that you can do all of your work in the office. And also the opportunities allow us to be more nimble now and operate at speed, because that's one of the things that technology does. And it might be solving some of our long-term problems about this idea of thinking about how we should best be more inclusive as an organization across all different types of tech characteristics, but also to be just more supporting of people and working in a more cohesive way with that real work-life balance. I think this idea, and we'll talk about this hopefully in the Q&A and the other speakers, is this idea that not everything has to happen face-to-face synchronously. So the use of asynchronous technology, which basically means when you communicate with someone and you don't get an instant reply, I think is one of the biggest disruptive factors for us to be thinking about. And so some of the implications for us are that, knowing that this is a slow burn, how do we as individuals and colleagues actually think purposefully about how we can think of hybrid as a force of good, not just as something that was a mere blip in our working lives, and really think about how we can support people. Because of course, people working from home or some locations is also difficult. In my past work experience, we've had issues, for example, where someone's home environment isn't necessarily a safe environment, and coming to work really is a safe space for them, as well as helping with things like social isolation. So the mental health issues that have been caused during the pandemic will ultimately, for home working at least, be solved. And there's something for us to absolutely be mindful of in the short term. It's not just a case of us talking today about how isn't this technology great and we should use it and not think about everyone else. It's about how we can work in harmony with it. And ultimately, the thing that I always come back to is, how do we get things done? Does it matter if a member of staff works at 4 in the morning instead of working in the afternoon? Does it matter if they all decide to communicate with an online tool such as basecamp.com, for example, for project management, and they never actually meet, or they decide to meet in different ways because they want to use their time more effectively? I think it's a real challenge for us, but I do think that we're all up for that challenge. And let's remember that the technology is just a small part of that, but let's also focus on our processes and focus on the culture of our organizations and how we can support people. I think we're going to go forward, sideways and backwards over the next few years, but it's something we absolutely must all face head on rather than going back to the old way. And at that point, I'm going to stop and look forward to speaking to you all shortly.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you so much, Zach. Loads of great food for thought. And I hope that your brains are all tingling and you've got some questions for Zach. So just to remind people, if you've just joined, please do use the Q&A facility to put your questions in. We've got another 2 speakers to go, 10 minutes each, and then we'll be having an open session where we're going to be looking at the questions, having a chat, and able to draw you in and pull out some of those, some of the stuff that's coming out of everything everyone's talking about. So thank you to Zach. Our next speaker is Lisa Westcott Wilkins, who is the founder and director of a fantastic organization called DigVentures, who are doing brilliant stuff around civic participation and heritage. And she's going to be talking to us about the work they've been doing kind of in external, engaging people outwardly, and how hybrid has changed that. So welcome to Lisa.
Hi, morning everyone. I am the big nerd who actually put some slides together. So I'm just gonna go over to, and that's mostly to keep myself organized actually. So I'm just gonna share my screen now so I can blow through some of those. This is me. That's my email address. For anybody that wants to follow up with me directly on anything I'm about to say, please feel free. So I wanted to start just by introducing DV a little bit more, because we started as a hybrid organization in 2012. We specialize in crowdfunding and crowdsourcing. So our initial business model already had a really strong sort of hybrid formation. And that has been very important to the way that we operate in terms of our internal processes, but as well as how we flow our participation and engagement with the public through what we do. We were the first team in the world to successfully crowdfund and crowdsource an archaeological excavation. So that was our starting point. We realized in the very first moment that half the people who were going to support what we do financially, as well as with their energy, were never ever going to come to any of our sites. And so in 2012, that's where we started. And since then, we've now raised over £2 million. It's probably higher now because we're actively crowdfunding at the minute for our projects this year. And we have over 1,000 people both on our in our trenches and on our event programs, as well as across our socials and other digital channels. I love this tweet because it basically encapsulates what we do. We turn, watching things into doing things. So that being said, we also have, servicing the digital side, the hybrid side of how people flow through our organization means that we have a really strong focus on making sure that there's a lot of content and a lot of things for people to watch and experience if they can't come to our sites. So where we started, we're born digital. What I wanted to say about this is really important, and that follows on from what Zach was saying. Never ever use digital ever to replicate what you're already doing, by layering more tools, for example, onto a Zoom chat for your team or whatever else to interact. Allow being hybrid, allow using that digital to change your practice. What would it look like? How can your workflow be different with the advantages that digital can bring? Also following on from Zach is the whole idea of asynchronous collaboration, meaning some of my team are creative at noon, some of my team are creative at midnight. Some of the people that I interact with and who participate with us are in New Zealand, some are in Alaska. We have to be asynchronous across all of our channels so that when people can consume us or when people can be a part of what we're doing, there is stuff available for them. And then we have these come together points as a team, for example, where we interact. I would also take that a step further and say, does collaboration actually have to start with a meeting? If you want to participate and you want to invite people into your organization, as well as work with the people who are already inside, there are other ways of doing that than saying this is a moment in time that we all have to be at. That first word should be flat, not fault, but we started DV as a flat hierarchy. We talk a lot about personal leadership. One of the hybrid working methodologies, that has been really important for us are team social contracts, resilience check-ins. Again, I know I'm blowing through a lot of stuff, but obviously this is something I'm really passionate about and I've been thinking about for more than a decade. So please do feel free to check in with me after if I don't go deep enough on any of this stuff. I put this final green text, breakfast meetings and last minute London trips, because as Zach was saying, rather than going back to work the same way we always were, let's go forward into work, into a new way of doing things. I was recently asked to attend a breakfast meeting, not going to happen, and also a last minute London trip, which when I checked the train tickets, in order to get there would have been £369, and I'm just not prepared to do that anymore. So I'm now going to move into talking about how COVID has changed and accelerated our participation model, even though we had sort of already started in a hybrid way. So we skipped a couple slides. So during COVID, our physical participation went down by 75% and our digital participation went up by 3,100%. Our channels were flooded. Initially it was a scramble for us to actually service the demand. So what we did was use things we already had. So we already had an online course and we already had a festival platform, so a learning management system. I'm really sorry my slides aren't advancing, but so what we did is we just opened up our course for anyone in the world who wanted to use it. These were people who should have been digging with us on site in the summer and obviously couldn't get there. We thought we'd have like a handful of people who wanted to try doing some archaeology online. That ended up at being over 11,000 people in 92 countries. It was the same. We did a weekend festival that we were supposed to actually do on site at Sudeley Castle, and we had to pivot that online, and that was a part of those 11,000 people. What's important for us about that is that we really leaned into designing it for a mobile audience. Not everybody has a laptop. not everybody has secure Wi-Fi. You know, if people were out using hotspots, or if people are really only have their mobile, how could we make it possible for our participants to find us no matter what technology they actually had? And this is just a distribution map of where the people who consumed our content were based. So it was fantastic for us, because normally when people travel to our digs, and this is the festival, we get a high proportion of people who are local to those areas, which is great. But the hybrid model of doing real in-depth, actual participatory guided experiences online meant that we attracted a whole new audience, which is super for us in terms of resilience. Again, so, oops, sorry about that. The impact of that, we won the Europa Nostra Award. We've learned that, which is important because that's a whole new community of practice for us and another big conversation for us to be part of. It made things possible for us that wouldn't have been otherwise. For financial health or climate concern reasons, that is becoming increasingly a factor in our decision making. And a high proportion of our audience had never had the opportunity to do any archaeology before. And for them, the experience of doing it online was as real as it would have been, you know, being in a trench, and they're now motivated to go into getting more involved with archaeology. So that's new audience for us, very important. And at the bottom is just something we're thinking about. You know, we see a lot of big organizations struggling with hybrid participation models because they're really worried about making money and how it's going to contribute to their bottom line. So what I would say, if you're in one of those organizations, is look at your bottom line, and is there something maybe that you can add to the bottom line to help make this activity something measurable. It isn't just about the money. And then finally, if I can get my slides to advance, we will never be the same as an organization. We implemented a subs model, which is taking off. Our fifth trench, which is our digital arm, the watch pages that you saw, is now completely equal with what we were doing in person. There are just as many people, if not more, flowing through that. We now have a new community of practice in terms of our peers that we didn't have previously. We think it's a scalable template actually for other organizations to look at in future. So that's my whistle stop tour. I'll stop sharing now.
Great, thank you so much, Lisa. Wow, that was a lot. Fantastic. You really grabbed everything with both hands during the pandemic, and it's great to see. So thank you so much. And we've got a couple of good questions coming in, so we're going to be in for a good discussion. Just to remind people, please do put any questions you have for any of the speakers in the Q&A, and we will come to those after our next speaker, who is Mark Bishop from National Trust in Scotland. And Mark has got a fantastic job title. He's Director of Customer and Cause, which I love. I think that's brilliant. Anyway, welcome to you, Mark.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Just for those who can't see me, I'm a white male, early 50s, with an 80s tuft of hair and a green t-shirt. You may get unintended sound effects in this presentation in the sense of a dog. Possibly the washing machine may finish its cycle, and who knows, an Amazon delivery might buzz the door any time. I'm really delighted to be speaking to you for the next 10 minutes because I can see from the organisations on this session that there are, a very wide range of very important museums, galleries, and charities out there. And notwithstanding the fact that we know we're living in difficult times in a kind of world sense, and we've all been through a hedge backwards in the last couple of years, I do think now is a really exciting crossroads point, as you've heard from the previous speakers. So I'm going to talk to you about National Trust for Scotland and give you a very brief case study of how we're addressing the hybrid issues from an internal perspective. So there's obviously an external dimension to that, which is our whole engagement model, but actually I'm going to talk to you about the inside the organisation implications. And I guess if there was a kind of summary of what I'm going to cover off in the next few minutes, it would be that purpose-led organisations, like the ones that we're all representing, who have hopefully motivated and very aligned employees, can really embrace a hybrid model more effectively, because we know we can trust our people to work without having to put them in the chicken pen of the office, if I'm going to put it like that. But I think the challenge sometimes is getting to a shared culture across an organisation. And I would argue, and I'll talk about it in the next few minutes, that for us at the Trust, we do see face-to-face as an important part of the mix going forward. So I guess you heard me just say that, in a sense, we in our organisations have almost an unfair advantage in terms of having teams who are driven by our shared sense of purpose in each of our organisations. And so that unfair advantage is something I think we can genuinely build on when thinking about hybrid approach. A couple of health warnings about me. So I'm not an HR expert, but I have worked in the voluntary sector for the last 20 or so years, and I'm one of the main directors at the National Trust of Scotland. I've been there for the last 6 years. I've got a good sense of the kind of issues that we face as an organisation. The three things I just want to cover off is just giving you a sense of National Trust of Scotland's biggest issues pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, because you'll find that there's kind of a journey we're on that's actually been accelerated by what we've been through in the last couple of years. I'm going to outline for you very briefly the hybrid guidance that we've just issued to our staff team in the last week, just to give you a sense of the key parameters to that and the thinking behind it. And then finally, I'm just going to talk about a few pros and cons of hybrid working from an organisational and an employee perspective. So National Trust for Scotland maybe needs not too much introduction, but just to kind of introduce the charity for those who are less familiar with our work. We would describe ourselves as Scotland's largest conservation charity. We look after coastlines to castles, art, architecture, wildlife to wilderness. So a very broad range of activities in Scotland. So I would describe us as very genre rich and very broad in our geographic reach as well. So that issue that Zach was talking about, dispersed ways of working, would very much apply to us because we've got people and places right across Scotland. Our enduring challenge pre-pandemic was to kind of find a way to make sure that each of our properties and places dialed up their unique heritage sort of storytelling and interpretation, but that we introduce common, boring sort of systems and processes, all the finance stuff, the HR stuff, all those sorts of approval processes needed common sets of systems. So since 2018, we've put all of those systems in place. And I think what we were saying to ourselves just pre-pandemic was the biggest challenge, therefore, going forward, was how do you build a shared sense of culture as an organisation, what we call a one trust mindset, so that everybody in the charity, regardless of whether they're in a castle, a garden, the northeast, northwest, south, and so forth, feel that they're part of the National Trust of Scotland first, rather than thinking specifically about their role, their property, or very kind of local context, because it's that commonality that we're keen to build. And that's particularly the case now because we've just launched our brand new 10-year strategy, Nature, Beauty, Heritage for Everyone. And that strategy is all about outward looking, public benefit, but we're also considering how we go about achieving our 10-year objectives, not just what we're going to do in those 10 years. So the hybrid guidance that we've just issued to our team in the last couple of days has a few key kind of messages in it. Firstly, it's saying that some roles are eligible and some roles may not be eligible for hybrid working in the full sense. So if you're working, I know, at a castle as a visitor services rep there, it's less easy for you to have the same level of hybrid flexibility than perhaps somebody in an office-based setting. We said for those who can work in a hybrid context that we would specify that 60% of your designated time would still be in your primary place of work, i.e. probably an office or a particular kind of property. So I'll come back to that 60% rule in a second. But therefore, the 40% of your time would be on average spent working from home. That 60% in an office, your designated place of work, could be the office proper. It could be a regional hub office. It could be at a property setting, or in the case of many of my team, could be at a marketing partner office as well. I think actually the other day, Zach and I were having this conversation about the 60% stuff. And I think Zach was saying it kind of fills him with dread sometimes when he hears organizations saying they're going to mandate 60%. So let me kind of just give you a sense of why we've ended up with that as the kind of number. The challenge is when thinking about sort of tax issues and employee kind of rights and stuff like that, if you say you don't have a designated place of work or it's left more fluid, I think the challenge would be that your employees could potentially be charging you travel expenses to travel from home to the office or anywhere else. So we've said, actually, the designated place of work is where what your contract says. But in reality, we're not going to be clock watching and monitoring people on a daily kind of basis. So it's a kind of stated average just to kind of navigate all the HR and employment law kind of parameters. I think the plus side that we see from a hybrid model is the idea of simultaneous reach. I think one of the things I've noticed as a director before, when affecting change across the organisation, we would literally do road trips around the country just to get out to our properties and places and our people. And that meant that you kind of, by the fact you're physically travelling, couldn't be reaching everybody simultaneously. So you always had some people feeling that they were seen first and some people feeling they were seen last. That's overcome. You can now share to everybody a message on a simultaneous kind of basis. I also think it allows us to democratize trust, because it allows us, rather than just saying more senior people can have a bit more flexibility in terms of their work arrangement, we're pushing that kind of flexibility through the organization. So therefore more junior members of staff can also benefit from more flexible kind of ways of working. That organizational culture, I think, is probably easier to build because of that simultaneous delivery. I think what will be more challenging is thinking about the individual team culture if people aren't coming together face to face. I would also say that meetings on Teams and Zoom tend to be what I would see as very kind of task orientated. And so therefore I'm not so clear on whether we're spending enough time on thinking about developing people and the softer side of kind of meetings. And I think we all know that the issues around comfort breaks and whatever else, we're all bouncing from meeting to meeting, whereas sometimes in a physical context, you have physically got to travel between meetings. So you've got time for a cup of tea and a toilet break. And I think one of the things that we're going to have to think very carefully about the trust is issues of I don't know, possible resentment, if I use that word, between members of our teams who are in fixed locations and therefore have less flexibility versus the likes of me, who could actually have much more flexibility in terms of the hours I work, where I work, and so forth. So we've got to think through what it looks like for different employees across the organisation. But I guess my takeaway message for us would be that it is important to embrace change. I would say for organisations that are embarking on a hybrid approach, don't set your plans in stone. Talk openly to your workforce and say, look, this is a new journey for all of us, and let's keep it under constant review so that if you do need to kind of navigate changes, you have the ability to kind of make those changes rather than find yourself in a fixed position. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mark. Lots of great stuff. And we've started to have some really nice questions coming in. So thank you very much to everyone who's put your questions into the Q&A, and please carry on doing so. Welcome back to Lisa and Zach. I hope if you've had a chance to have a look, let's start with Nick Dixon's put a question just following on from what Mark was saying. He's saying he totally agrees with the idea of a 40-60 remote working office split. I also think there's a big difference between existing teams adapting to work remotely and newly formed teams or new starters. He's saying as a manager of a small team, 4 or 5 people delivering a lottery partnership scheme, all recruited during COVID. I'm sure that's ringing a bell for everybody. I feel there's a real need for us to be in the office together for a good part of the week. This will allow us to develop better as a team. So thoughts on that from initially Mark, and I guess anyone else if you have anything to add.
Yeah, Nick, I think thank you for those thoughts and question. And I think what you're saying is it's not a sort of black and white issue. These things evolve over time, not just at an organizational level, but for individuals and for teams. So clearly, if you've got a new starter, whether it's online or face-to-face, you're going to spend more time with that person from an induction point of view, giving them the technical knowledge and the cultural kind of fit knowledge that they need for your organization. And sometimes, and in fact, I've just got a brand new head of marketing on that cover join yesterday. I spent the day, face-to-face with her because I felt that having time together, breaking bread and having lunch together, walking to get the sandwich, all of those sort of physical things were an important part of me signaling to her how important it was that she's joining the organisation. And I, as her director, value her and want to spend the time with her, not just click in and click out of a meeting. So I'm kind of really supporting what you're saying there, Nick.
Could I just offer something as well about that? What I read in Nick's question is that he feels there is a real need for them all to be in an office together for a good part of the week to facilitate these things, but and which I can totally understand. But what we found is we couldn't hire the best people for the jobs that we had on offer if we had to ask them to move somewhere to be in a physical location. So, but obviously, our work is very different and we're traveling around the country. So there are opportunities for us to be together as a team in other places. And we accept that in terms of the way we expense jobs and, all the rest of it. But we use those moments where the team comes together in other places to facilitate the sort of team building aspects of what Nick was talking about. So what I would say is that might really work for you as a manager. And then, because of the responsibilities that you have, you need to implement that so you can do your job better. But maybe think about what that means for the people that you're asking to be in a certain place for that amount of time. And there are ways to learn roles, to share ideas, and to bond that don't involve bringing people together at the same time.
And I'd just like to add as well that there's a really good book called Art of Gathering that talks a lot about different ways of people meeting. And I think that's a really good, I say it's one of the cornerstone books for us all to learn about this. And to Nick's question around should you be face-to-face or not, and to Lisa's point, because I think the answer, and it comes to my typical computer background, is it depends, doesn't it? There are different times when it is great to bring people together, and there are other times when actually it really doesn't matter. So that's why I was saying to Mark, half tongue in cheek, that the whole 60-40 thing felt to me like a fudge. Like, we're doing it because actually legally you have to say basically a remote worker or you're based in an office. That's not actually solving our real problems. Now, that's not to say that the market and others can't make it all work. I just think we should all be looking at our specific contexts, the experience of the members of staff, us having ways of addressing the problems. So the biggest problem I hear, for example, is people assume that young people will not get promoted if they're not in the office. And as far as I'm aware, that's a myth. I'm not saying it won't necessarily happen in the next 2 or 3 years, but it takes all of us on this video call right now to ensure it doesn't happen. Like, surely our metric of people getting promoted isn't about who tells the best jokes in the office, who buys the fanciest cakes. So I think there's a lot of work for us to do to be more inclusive and to think about that art of gathering. And it's a really good book, so do check it out if you can. Probably available in your local library as well.
There's a fantastic, the author is Priya Parker. There's a fantastic interview with her that Brené Brown has done, which I noticed that my colleague Alex put the link to the book in, but if you could put the link into the podcast, it's on Spotify, it's free. It's a really great interview, which is a kind of easy way if you're out, going for a walk. It's a good way to get some of this in. Thank you for that. So just following on, I think there's another really interesting question here around this idea of accessibility and equity. So Than's put a question in initially to Zach, but she's saying she agrees with your proposition on propositioning the opportunity that hybrid working brings for flexibility and accessibility, but she's interested in how we address equity when it comes to hybrid working and how operationally some roles allow for advantages of what hybrid working brings more than others. Mark, you spoke a little bit to that too. And when we have buildings to staff, what processes can we have in place to enable fairness of opportunity to hybrid roles across work? So Zach, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think it's about being transparent and very clear about what roles are allowed to do. So I think Mark talked about the example being very clear when they recruit about who has a role and what that role does. So for example, if I was a pilot, I would expect to fly the plane, right, and not be back at base. And I think the team who fly the plane, the flight attendants, for example, they accept and understand that their job is to be on the plane all day compared to the office staff. So as long as there's very clear guidance about why someone has a different role from you, it's about then looking about speaking to those staff and understanding what they also might think would help to make it more equitable. So, if your job means that you're spending a lot of time away from your desk and you're with customers, for example, are there other benefits that we can add that aren't necessarily the working from home direct benefits? Are there things that we can do, the soft part of the job that should help people? Because, so for example, understanding at what proportion of the job actually has to happen face to face is one thing, and then accepting to say to people, do you know what, we're going to give people a whole day or more, doesn't matter percentage wise, where we don't mind if they come to work or they don't come to work. Now, I have some staff, for example, who want to come to work because the cost of heating their home, running their home, is prohibitive, right? So they want to come to the office because it's more cost effective for them. That's not the same for someone who lives an hour away. So I think it's about looking at individuals and then being consistent across the organisation. So you don't have us and them mentality to make it change. What I would also say is it's evolving. So it's really about us all now understanding what people's gripes are with others doing other things and really assessing that. And that has happened actually before the pandemic. So it wasn't even remote working. There are some people who would say that if you work in an office, that has an unfair advantage versus someone else doing another type of role. So it's about really kind of going back to the root causes and issues and making sure that it's seen as a fair process for people. And then also having the ability for people, in our organization, for example, we're trying to experiment with having potentially hybrid roles even, where people get the ability for a period of the day, the day, week, year, however, to swap roles, to enable them to try different ways of doing things and seeing if they like that as well. But I know Lisa's got a hand up.
Lisa.
Yeah, I wanted to build off that and just say, it's important to understand what the people who don't have hybrid roles like visitor services or other kinds of services where they have to be on site, what do they perceive as the advantages of having the hybrid role that might make them feel like they didn't have parity, So understanding why they feel like they're not getting as good of a deal as the people who can work hybrid, I think is the root of all of this, because then you can find other ways to service that need in them so they do feel like they've got parity. But again, we have to be realistic about this stuff for those of us who run venues or whatever, that some people just aren't going to be able to do the hybrid thing in the same way. But I think it goes a long way to be really clear as an organization that you recognize that and that you're doing your best to service it. And I've read about there are some solutions out there already for that, but really it does you have to have the conversation. Like if, for example, if you're giving people a gym membership, we see this a lot in my sector, companies sort of saying these are our benefits, it's amazing, great, you're giving people gym memberships, but you're not giving them a workable schedule so that they can actually go to the gym ever. So let's figure out some benefits and stuff that are portable and that everyone can enjoy.
Mark, did you want to add anything? Or
Yeah, I just picking up what Lisa was saying there was in the case where people have roles that do require them to be more fixed. So I'm just thinking about actually our footpath team who are literally building or mending footpaths across Scotland so that people can access the hills safely. Their work is physical. It's it has to be done kind of face to face. It's very seasonal. There's some months of the year where they just can't do that from a safe kind of point of view. And there's also a kind of light hours of the day issue. So their work is constrained by the outdoor settings, if I kind of put it like that. But to answer Lisa's question around, how do you build benefits in for people who have the most extreme version of old style of physical kind of working? I think what we'd say is we're finding that by giving people the right tools, they can stay in touch with the wider organization's work to build that shared sense of mission and purpose. I think it's allowing us to internally and externally to showcase their efforts. So rather than their work happens and the outside world just doesn't realize how that footpath came about, we can take content and share that content through. And in fact, we're trying to encourage more of our employees at the coalface to do that content themselves. So you're getting that frontline story from the team. Therefore, it means that more of my colleagues are attached to that shared sense of mission and purposeful delivery rather than just making a footpath. And so for me, that's a very positive thing because it allows everyone to feel like a heritage hero rather than just somebody who does footpaths over there.
Yeah, this sense of purpose is really important part of all of this. We've got quite a few questions around some practical stuff. So I want to start with with one from Saskia, which is to you, Lisa. Can you elaborate a bit more on the term social contracts, please?
Yeah, so that's part of the way that we check in terms of the resilience, meaning the mental and physical health of our team with social contracts. And it can be formal and it can be informal. We have a formalized version, which is called Dignity at Work and On Site. And that is an agreement between my team and our participants of how we are actually going to engage with each other, both in person and online. And then our team social contracts involve, how often we're going to be on all team meetings, how often we're going to do our check-ins on our one-to-ones. And, to be perfectly honest, coming out of COVID, we've been less good about the one-to-ones and having those be more regular, but the pace of work just hasn't allowed for it. But those were some of the things that we started doing right away, and that's been really helpful in terms of creating those sort of safe spaces for them. But also we've instituted a buddy system. The buddy system is part of the social contract. Is what we basically say is, look, if you have something you don't want to escalate to your line manager, or you don't want anyone else in the team to know about. I mean, this during the actual height of the pandemic, this was important because, people were having some serious issues. And so, we gave everyone a buddy, and the buddy is the person that you can talk to about that stuff in the cone of immunity, totally confidential, that, as long as those were results orientated. So it wasn't just to bitch or to turn inward in a negative way, but to find solutions for the things that you were feeling. And if that needed something more from the team, then to escalate it upward. So the social contract can be both formal and informal, but it's a really important page for you both to be on to start with if you're going to be remote.
Great, thank you. There's some other questions around the challenges for emerging and young professionals who are kind of starting out and having to work online, maybe working from their bedrooms. I know that was happening with one of the staff members at Cults 24, not having a home office, tax tips, tactics on how you guys have been dealing with that.
I'd kick off by saying, again, think about it. So think with purpose about, what are our measures of success as an organisation? I think what I've come to realise is, in my career certainly, is you have an annual appraisal and you get rated poor, good, great. Everyone gets average because it's easier for everyone to do that, right? People don't adjust the negative problems, and people don't have one-to-ones. There's no easy metrics for people to say your performance throughout the year. And so I would say that we're at the very beginning again of how we then support people actually early in their career. So again, demonstrate that they're doing a really good job and how that can then lead to transferable skills in other areas. Again, in my experience, transition to manager, not a single question. I've never, ever, and now leading an organization of 140 people, I've never, ever had a question that asked me about how good I was at managing people. They were always about, can you look after spreadsheets? Can you do this? Can you do that? And it's fascinating to me. I think it's a complete blind spot to professional development, not just in our sector, just generally, that we are now facing the challenges of what the pandemic has brought to light. It's actually you working really hard and doing a good job is not a safe, direct indicator of your progression through your organization. So I think that's definitely something we're going to be looking at, very, very soon. But what I would encourage people to do is to take advantage of whatever their equivalents are at the moment. So if lots of organizations are starting to move to having 2 or 3 times a year meetups, using those actually as an opportunity to really get to know what people are doing. I'd also say to shout about your work. Too few people, this is even before the pandemic, actually when they're doing a good job, they expect people to notice them. I always encourage people to make sure that they take the opportunity to staff newsletter or staff meeting to let people know they're doing well. I know that introverts are kind of more difficult, but what I would say is just to try to find mechanisms, whether writing or speaking, to help support them on that. Because I would say, the current model of progression is not a fair one, and I don't think that's the fault of hybrid working. I think that's our lack of ability as leaders in organizations.
Do you have your hand up? Was that from before? Oh.
No. I wanted to say, building off of what Zach said, I think the second part to that question was, what about young professionals living in shared accommodation who don't have a home office, who don't have the tools? And again, I would say, look at what the expectation is in terms of the output. Like, what is the work that these people are producing? Can they do their work to standard, like Zach was saying? Like, can they still feel like they are doing good work, and not have to be bound to the 9 to 5 when everyone else is trying to be online, when your kids might be using the broadband or whatever, like finding ways so that the work that they actually are expected to produce can still be appreciated and maybe done when they do have more access to, for example, to devices or to broadband or to get to a place where there's more space for them to work. So thinking creatively around solutions to focusing on the work rather than the time of day or whatever it's being done.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Mark, on in introducing new staff, how you've worked around that?
Yeah, so just sort of building out the conversation we've just been having here. I think about that sort of invisibility for folks who are newer into their careers. Actually, I think one of the big pluses of hybrid working, particularly because of the kind of use of Teams and Zoom, is I've noticed more junior members of teams get brought to directors' meetings to present items themselves, which might not always happen quite the same way physically. So I'm finding that more people are being showcased for their skills earlier in their career. So actually there are pluses there in terms of giving people visibility, as long as people have the ability to present kind of effectively through the screen. But in terms of introducing people, I think that some of this stuff is about just making sure an organisation has a very clear induction programme. And increasingly, I think what we're finding at the Trust is we want our induction programme as pre-recorded video files so that I can offer people a guaranteed presentation from all of the departments across the organisation, rather than physically trying to bring people together once every month or every quarter for the kind of notional corporate induction. Because if you've joined and it's 3 months to the corporate induction, that's a long time to wait to get to people. Whereas I can give people access to all the departments and all the key people on their first day. And that's something that wouldn't have been possible otherwise.
Yeah, it's that freedom that asynchronous communication gives us all that's so important, but it's gearing up for that, isn't it? It's getting ready and getting the resources and being prepared, and you know that's a job in itself. There's a question here from Helen, again a practical one around tips and recommendations for facilitating hybrid meetings. We have been considering various options such as Owl Labs, Meeting Owl, which is not something I've heard of actually. I don't know whether you guys have. But keen to hear about anything that works for people.
Again, I think it's about setting out a social contract, right, around what is acceptable, when you're going to do it, and how you're best going to do it. So, for example, I've been to a few hybrid meetings of late where no one really wants the hybrid person to be on the call, and they go, "Oh, this is going to be a pain, right? And we'll stick a laptop in the corner, and if they can hear us, they can hear us. If they can't hear us, that's just tough luck, right?" So I'd say a basic thing, right, is obviously having the right technology to support hybrid working. And the next thing, which goes back to being a child almost. You know, when you're a kid, they'd put you in a big circle and they'd say, if you've got a tennis ball, you can speak. So everyone gets the opportunity to speak, right? It's like going back to that almost. It's saying, do you know what? We're going to go around the room. It happens to be that person's online, and we're gonna let them speak. So I think some of this, I've got a child in primary school right now. I think I can learn a lot from primary school teachers. I think in how to operate in those kinds of meetings is what I would say. And also, I had a really good tip from someone who said that they, in their organisation, that they agreed that they agreed in advance. 100% of people had to agree if a hybrid meeting was allowed before the meeting, and they'd say, right, well, it's actually going to face-to-face meeting, like for pros and cons. To just be super clear to people and say, look, we're not going to make. We've concluded that certain styles of meeting have to be all together or all online. I like that idea actually. They're saying, like, doesn't help us for hybrid all the time, but they're kind of saying make it all online might be actually better for some people than trying to do a little combination of it.
And I would add to that, like, what do you want out of the meeting and how many people are going to be in it? So it's not necessarily about the platform. I don't think there's going to be any platform all of a sudden that's going to make these meetings more productive or easier to run when they're hybrid in that way. But it's about how you structure it. And as you know, circulating a set of questions or like the problem set that you're trying to answer, like having an online decision board ahead of time, the meeting, like, where do you want to take this conversation? Where does it need to end up? What do you need out of it? And doing as much of that as you can before you actually get into that moment is really, really helpful. You know, online decision boards are something that we do. Online, whiteboards are something that we do. And a lot of it, we all know by now, I think that online takes 3 times as much effort and time as just doing stuff in person. So it's building in that prep time before you actually go into the hybrid meeting format.
Mark, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, I mean, really just a couple of practical bits, from me. I've noticed, building on Lisa's point there around things take longer sometimes, is I sit on our National Trust of Scotland USA Foundation board that's served out of the States. And I think I find the American team there are very formal about their, formal proposers and seconders and votes and vote count and stuff like that. And so therefore you do need to make sure that everyone has cameras on and you've got the hand protocol, and people hold their hands, and the chair is very strict about counting the room, kind of stuff like that. So depending on the environment, you need to make sure that formal governance protocols are kind of adhered to. One of my bugbears will be on hybrid meetings is the camera on, camera off kind of issue. I guess there's always situations where somebody has a reason not to have their camera on. But I guess if I was in a face-to-face meeting with my directorate, I wouldn't, you know, be deliberate here. I wouldn't imagine people hiding underneath the table and not being seen. So I think it's quite disarming as a kind of director and leader of a people. If you're presenting to your team, you kind of want to see people and see their reaction and bounce off of them. And so I'm trying to ask people, you know, at the trust to say, unless there's exceptional reason, please have your cameras on so we can have that shared sense of community, even though we're not physically together.
Yeah. Again, it's coming back to that sense of trust and culture, isn't it? And how you build that. I mean, one of the things we do obviously a lot of work now online at Culture 24, and we just try and just keep everything very people-centered and be clear what the expectation is. When are you presenting? When are people receiving information? When are they communicating? Using the breakout rooms. I mean, as Lisa said, I don't think there's any magic platform that's going to make this stuff easier. It's how we as humans construct the space and allow those conversations to happen. Just really quickly, we've got like 1 more minute, just final thoughts from you. Got a great question from Tan on how do we build a harmonious high performance culture? Thoughts on that before we just finally wrap up?
I'll go first. I think for me is admitting that the current way of doing things wasn't the best way of doing things, and that we will strive together, you know, as a workforce and as a sector to make it better. So let's identify the problems and, you know, iterate to make the organisations better, better for all, rather than kind of, rather than just slowly heading towards the big iceberg.
Yeah, and we are the eternal 2-year-old in the room. It's like, why? You know, at this point, you know, moving forward into the new way of working is we have to unlearn. It's innovation, right? We have to unlearn the things that we just accepted before as the reasons why things have to be that way. So starting with why, really, for me, always.
And for me, my scratch record would be, in any context, hybrid or otherwise, is make sure your organisational sense of purpose is clear to everybody in your organisation, and that you have a clear set of values by which you govern the way you work together, and therefore face-to-face, online, hybrid, whatever else, those things come through.
Brilliant. Thank you guys so much. So all of the links and everything that we've been talking about will go out to all of the participants in an email. So thank you for sharing all of that. Just to remind you before we wrap up, this is the first of a series of 6 seminars that are part of the Digital Skills for Heritage Programme, National Lottery Heritage Fund. Culture 24 are running. The next one is each on different themes. The next theme is digital skills, literacy and capacity. They're all aimed at leadership. And that one will be on the 26th of April. My colleague, I think, is just putting the links out, but again, we'll put them in an email to you all. Subsequent themes are digital behind the scenes, inclusion, equity and digital enterprise and heritage digital and the climate crisis. So lots of really important topics there. But I just hope you will join me in saying a huge thank you to Mark Bishop and Lisa and Zach for a brilliant presentations and thoughts, and thank you for being so honest. Thank you for your energy. It's been really great talking to you. I wish we could carry on for a bit longer, but we're finishing at 11. So thank you all for joining us, and thanks for the questions. And we will hopefully see you at our next session on the 26th of April.